In the village of Koga, there lived a boy named Chima. His father, Ola, was a kind and hard-working man. Even though they were poor, Ola did his best to provide for his family. He loved Chima deeply and always made sure he felt cared for. Chima's mother, Dara, was the most beautiful woman in the village. Many people admired her, and when she married Ola, they thought she would have a happy life. But Dara didn't feel that way. She believed she deserved more than what Ola could give her. She felt that someone as beautiful as her shouldn't be trapped in a life of poverty with an older man like Ola. When they got married, Ola promised Dara that things would get better, that one day they would live comfortably. But as time passed, nothing improved. In fact, things only seemed to get worse. The little money Ola earned was never enough, and they struggled more with each passing day. Dara grew more frustrated, feeling that her beauty was wasted in a poor, simple life. One day, she decided she had enough. Without a word to Chima or Ola, Dara left their home. She didn't say goodbye. She just disappeared. Chima was heartbroken and confused, not understanding why his mother would leave them. Ola, although deeply hurt, tried to stay strong for his son. After Dara left, Ola worked even harder to take care of Chima. He made sure his son never felt unloved, even though their life became more difficult. Ola would tell him stories, teach him important lessons, and always remind him to stay kind, even when life felt hard. After Dara left, life became even harder for Chima and his father Ola. Ola worked long hours every day, taking on any small job he could find to put food on the table. Even though they had very little, Ola made sure that Chima was taken care of. He never complained, and whenever Chima asked about his mother, Ola would smile sadly and say, she had her reasons. Chima could see that his father was struggling, but Ola always reassured him. Things will get better, son. You just have to stay strong. Despite his father's words, their situation only seemed to get worse. The little money Ola earned barely covered their needs, and sometimes they would go days with just a small meal. Ola was getting older, and the hard work started to wear him down. Chima noticed that his father was coughing more often and seemed weaker as time went on. At first, Ola tried to hide it, but it soon became clear that he was getting sick. Chima became worried, but they didn't have money to see a doctor or buy medicine. Ola continued to work, even when he was too weak to stand. I'll be fine, he would say, but Chima could see that his father's condition was getting worse. One night, as Ola lay in bed, he called Chima over and spoke in a soft voice. Chima, you're a good boy. I know life has been hard, but I need you to be strong. You're all I have left, and I'm sorry I couldn't give you more. You've given me everything, Papa. Please don't leave me, Chima said with tears in his eyes. Ola smiled weakly and placed his hand on Chima's head. I love you, my son. Always remember that. Be kind no matter what. Not long after, Ola passed away quietly in his sleep. Chima was left alone in the world, heartbroken and unsure of what the future would hold. After his father Ola passed away, Chima was sent to live with his uncle, Nnamdi, and his aunt Chioma. Chima had hoped they would take care of him the way his father had. But his new life with them was nothing like he imagined. Nnamdi was nothing like his brother Ola. He was a harsh and cruel man who seemed to enjoy making Chima's life difficult. Any small mistake Chima made would lead to harsh punishments. If Chima was late fetching water or didn't do his chores exactly right, Nnamdi would beat him without mercy. He called Chima useless and a burden, never missing a chance to remind him that he was only in the house because they had no choice. Chioma, Chima's aunt, wasn't any better. She made Chima do all the chores, cleaning, cooking, fetching water, and barely gave him enough food to eat. While her own children sat down to big meals, Chima was given scraps or leftovers, if anything at all. He grew thin and weak, but he had no choice but to endure it. Chima's days were filled with hard labor, and his nights were filled with fear. He missed his father every day, remembering how kind and loving he had been. Now there was no one to protect him from the harshness of his uncle and aunt. However, there was one person in the house who showed Chima kindness: Chuka, his cousin, and Nnamdi's son. Chuka was the only one who treated Chima with any care. They would sneak away to talk when no one was watching, and Chuka would sometimes share his food with Chima when he noticed how little his cousin was being given. Though Chuka couldn't protect him from the beatings or the harsh treatment, He was the only friend Chima had in that dark and lonely house. One night, after a long and exhausting day of chores, Chima fell asleep quickly. His body was weak from the lack of food and constant hard work. But when he woke up the next morning, he felt something terrible. He had wet the bed. Chima panicked. He knew what would happen if his uncle Namdi found out. He tried to hide the wet sheets, but it was no use. Namdi stormed into the room, his face full of anger. "You useless boy!" Namdi shouted, his voice booming through the house. "You can't even sleep without making a mess!" Chima tried to explain, but before he could say anything, Namdi grabbed him by the arm and dragged him out of the room. Without any warning, Namdi reached for a knife. Chioma, Chima's aunt, stood nearby, watching but saying nothing. She didn't care what was happening, as long as it didn't affect her. "No, uncle, please," Chima cried, begging for mercy. But Namdi didn't listen. In a fit of rage, he did the unthinkable. He cut off Chima's manhood. Chima screamed in pain, the blood pouring from his body. The pain was unbearable, and he felt like he was going to die right there. Chioma and Namdi simply watched, their faces cold and uncaring. Chima collapsed to the floor, barely conscious, thinking this would be the end. But then, out of nowhere, Chuka, Chima's only friend and cousin, rushed into the room. When he saw what had been done to Chima, his heart filled with pity. Chuka knew that if he didn't act fast, Chima would die. As Chima lay bleeding on the floor, barely conscious, Chuka quickly rushed to his side. He couldn't believe what his father, Namdi, had done. Chima wasn't just a cousin. Without wasting any time, Chuka lifted Chima, struggling to carry his weak and injured body. "Hold on, Chima, I'll get help," Chuka whispered, his heart pounding in fear. He knew there was no time to lose. Chuka's father, Namdi, shouted after him, "Where do you think you're going? Leave him, he deserves it." But Chuka didn't listen. His mind was focused only on one thing: saving his friend. He had heard the villagers talk about a healer named Obi, a man known for his great skills in treating even the worst injuries. Obi lived on the edge of the village, far from everyone else. Chuka carried Chima as fast as he could, his arms shaking with effort. He knew if he didn't reach Obi in time, Chima would die from his injuries. When they finally arrived at Obi's hut, Chuka banged on the door, shouting for help. Obi appeared quickly, shocked at the sight of Chima's bleeding body. "Bring him inside," Obi said calmly, though his eyes showed concern. Chuka helped Obi lay Chima on a mat, and the healer immediately began working on him. Chuka watched, his heart filled with fear and hope. Obi was known for his skills, but Chima's injuries were severe. Obi didn't ask questions. He worked silently and quickly, trying to stop the bleeding and save Chima's life. "This will be hard," Obi said softly as he carefully tended to the wounds. "But I'll do everything I can." Chuka stayed by Chima's side, watching the healer's every move, praying that his friend would survive. As Chima lay weak and bleeding, barely able to hold on, the healer Obi continued working to stop the bleeding. However, Obi knew that no matter how hard he tried, Chima's injuries were too severe for conventional healing. Something more drastic was needed. Chima's cousin, Chuka, stood by, his heart racing as he watched Obi struggle to keep Chima alive. "Isn't there anything else you can do?" Chuka asked, his voice filled with fear. Obi looked at Chuka with a serious expression. "There is something," Obi said slowly, "but it's not an easy choice." Chima, barely able to keep his eyes open, tried to speak. "What? What do you mean?" Obi paused for a moment, and then reached for a small basket in the corner of the room. When he opened it, a small snake slowly slithered out. It coiled near Obi's feet, its eyes glowing softly in the dim light. Chima's eyes widened in fear when he saw the snake. He tried to move, but the pain from his wound was too much. "A snake!" he gasped, his body trembling. Obi explained that there was ancient magic that could give Chima a new kind of strength. It involved bonding with a snake, which would become a part of his body. "But you must learn to control it, or it will control you. The snake is harmless. It's under my control, and it might be the only thing that can save you." Chima, still confused and scared, asked, "What do you mean?" Obi leaned closer to Chima. "Do you know the difference between a man's manhood and a snake?" he asked, looking closely at Chima. Chima blinked in confusion. "What?" He glanced at the snake, side-eyeing the healer suspiciously. Then, as if a light bulb went off in his head, he let out a short, nervous laugh. "Well, they both like entering holes," he said hesitantly. The healer roared with laughter, slapping his knee. Chima then asked why the witch doctor had asked the question. "I don't know. I just thought about it. I guess one has to be careful of both since they seem to have their own will. Your injuries are too severe. I cannot replace what you've lost, but I can offer you something else." He gestured toward the snake. "This snake, it can become your new manhood." Chima's eyes widened in disbelief. "What?" he whispered. "How can I have a snake for a manhood? That's impossible." Chuka, standing nearby, was equally horrified. "You can't be serious. There has to be another way," he pleaded, looking at Obi desperately. But Obi shook his head. "There's no other way. If Chima doesn't accept this, he will bleed to death. His injuries are too severe for anything else. The snake will replace what's been taken from him, and it will help him control his body again." Chima was torn. The idea of having a snake for a manhood was terrifying, but Obi's words echoed in his mind. "You will die without it." He was desperate. With his real manhood gone, what other choice did he have? Slowly, he nodded. "All right," he whispered. "I'll do it." Obi's eyes gleamed with satisfaction. "Good choice, Chima." Obi began to whistle softly, a soothing melody. The snake slowly slithered toward Chima, its eyes locked onto him. Chima froze in fear as the snake coiled around his leg, moving up toward his thigh. It paused for a moment, waiting for Obi's command. With a wave of his hand, Obi whispered a spell, and the snake began to merge with Chima's body. Chima gasped as a strange sensation coursed through him. The snake fused with his skin, replacing what had been lost. As the transformation finished, the pain began to subside, and Chima felt a surge of strength. The snake had become part of him now. After the snake had become part of him, Chima remained with the healer, Obi, for weeks. Chuka, though heartbroken by what had happened to his cousin, knew that Chima needed time to learn and heal. He left Chima in Obi's care so that he could master the snake's power. Under Obi's guidance, Chima learned to control the snake. It responded to his commands, obeying him whenever he whistled. The snake had become more than just a replacement for what was lost. It was now a weapon. Chima no longer wet the bed, and for the first time in his life, he felt powerful, like he could take on the world. But with that power came something else: anger. Every night, Chima's mind raced with thoughts of revenge. He was furious at his uncle Namdi for the pain he had caused. But more than that, he blamed his mother Dara for abandoning him and his father. If she had stayed, none of this would have happened. Or so he believed. One night, the rage that had been building inside Chima for weeks finally boiled over. He couldn't hold it back anymore. Without a word to Obi, Chima left the healer's hut and made his way to his uncle's house, where his anger burned hottest. When Chima arrived, he stood in the doorway, his eyes dark with hatred. Namdi, who had been sitting quietly inside, looked up and froze when he saw Chima standing there. "You should be dead!" Namdi shouted, disbelief and fear in his voice. But Chima only smiled, a cold, cruel smile. He whistled softly as he stepped inside the house. The snake, which had been hiding within Chima's body, slithered out, responding to the soft sound of his whistle. Namdi's eyes widened in terror as the snake lunged at him. It sank its fangs into Namdi's flesh, injecting its venom. Chima stood silently, watching as his uncle fell to the ground, writhing in pain. Namdi screamed, but Chima felt nothing. His heart was cold as he watched the snake's venom take over his uncle's body. Namdi's breathing became shallow, his skin turned pale, and within moments, he was gone. But as Namdi took his last breath, Chima didn't feel the satisfaction he had expected. There was no joy in his revenge, only emptiness. Just then, Chuka and Chioma, Chuka's mother, rushed into the house. They had heard the screams and came to see what had happened. When Chuka saw his uncle lying dead on the floor and Chima standing there, he was filled with anger. "What have you done?" Chuka shouted. Chima's rage had not yet faded. He turned toward Chioma, his aunt, and considered using the snake on her too. She had treated him horribly, just like his uncle had. But before he could act, Chuka stepped in front of his mother, pleading with his friend. "Please, Chima, don't do this. It's over. You don't have to hurt her," Chuka begged, his voice desperate. Chima hesitated, his heart torn between his anger and the friendship he once had with Chuka. In the end, he couldn't bring himself to hurt his friend's mother. He gave one last look at Chuka, then turned and ran out of the house, disappearing into the night. After his uncle's death, Chima's heart grew darker. The emptiness that had filled him after his revenge remained, and it seemed to grow with each passing day. He began to wander from village to village, never staying in one place for too long. Wherever he went, he used the snake to punish those he believed had done wrong. Chima became a shadow in the night, his presence unknown to those around him. He never revealed himself or stayed long enough to be discovered. People whispered about strange events and mysterious deaths, but no one knew who was behind them. Chima took it upon himself to be the judge, punishing those he thought deserved it with the power of his snake. As the years passed, Chima became more isolated, his heart consumed by anger and bitterness. His path was filled with darkness, and there was no longer anyone left who could pull him out of it. Years passed, and Chima grew into a strong and handsome man. Wherever he went, women admired him, and he began to notice the power he held over them. Despite the pain and anger that had once consumed him, he found himself using his charm and looks to manipulate others when needed. Villages he passed through would whisper about the handsome stranger, but none of them knew the darkness he carried inside. Chima's heart, however, was still hardened by the past. Even though he had hurt many people with the power of the snake, there was one person he could never forget. His mother, Dara. She had left him and his father when they needed her most. Even after all these years, Chima's anger toward her burned just as fiercely as it did the day she left. He blamed her for everything. His father's death, his uncle's cruelty, his own suffering. It all came back to her decision to walk away. Over the years, Chima searched for Dara in every village he passed through. Each time he arrived in a new place, he would ask questions, quietly seeking information about her whereabouts. He wanted to confront her, to make her pay for abandoning them. And finally, one day, he found her. Dara was no longer the woman Chima remembered. She had remarried and was now living in the wealthy town of Ebiru, far from the poverty she had left behind. She was married to a rich man and had 2 children, Chima's half-siblings. She lived in a large, beautiful home, surrounded by luxury and comfort, while Chima had been left to suffer and struggle alone. From the shadows, Chima watched as Dara laughed and played with her new family. Her new husband, her 2 children. Everything she had now was what she had refused to give him and his father. The sight made Chima's blood boil. She looked so happy, as if she had completely forgotten about the family she had abandoned. Chima clenched his fists, his anger building with every passing moment. How could she move on so easily? How could she live this perfect life while he had been left with nothing but pain? That night, Chima made a decision. He would confront her. She would finally answer for leaving him and his father to suffer. She thought she could escape the past, but Chima would not let her forget. Under the cover of darkness, Chima sneaked into Dara's house. The memories of his painful past swirled in his mind. His father's sickness, his uncle's cruelty, the loss of his manhood. All of it led back to her. She was the reason he had suffered. Chima entered the house quietly, his heart pounding with a mixture of anger and sadness. He found Dara in the kitchen, preparing dinner for her new family. She didn't see him at first, and for a moment he just stood there watching her. The mother he once loved seemed like a stranger now. "Mama!" Chima's voice was cold, filled with years of pent-up rage. Dara turned around, startled. Her eyes widened in shock when she saw him. "Chima?" she whispered, barely believing what she was seeing. "Is it really you?" Chima stepped closer, his face twisted with a mix of pain and anger. "Yes, it's me, the son you left behind." Tears filled Dara's eyes as she tried to speak. Chima, I'm so sorry. I had no choice. Your father, he would have never let me leave. I had to run." Chima's anger flared at her words. "You left us," he shouted. "You abandoned me with nothing. Do you know what happened after you left? His voice broke as he spoke. Father died. He got sick and we couldn't afford to save him. Then I was sent to live with Uncle Namdi, who beat me every day, and when I wet the bed, he took everything from me. Dara gasped, her hand covering her mouth. No, Chima, I didn't know. I swear I didn't know. Chima shook his head, his eyes cold and unforgiving. You didn't care. You left me to suffer. Dara tried to step closer, reaching out to her son. I'm so sorry, Chima. I never wanted this to happen. Please, you have to believe me. But Chima didn't care about her apologies. He had waited too long for this moment. Slowly, he began to whistle, the soft, eerie sound that summoned the snake. Dara's eyes widened in terror as she saw the snake emerge from Chima's body, its dark scales glistening in the dim light of the kitchen. No, Chima, please don't, Dara cried, backing away, but it was too late. With a flick of his wrist and another sharp whistle, Chima sent the snake forward. It lunged at Dara, biting her arm with its deadly fangs. She screamed in pain, collapsing to the floor as the venom spread through her body. Chima watched silently as his mother writhed on the ground, her breathing becoming shallow, her skin turning pale. Dara looked up at Chima with pleading eyes. I'm sorry, she whispered, her voice weak. I loved you. I never wanted this. But the venom was too strong, and soon, her body went still. Chima stood over his mother's lifeless body, tears streaming down his face. He had finally taken his revenge, but instead of feeling satisfaction, all he felt was emptiness. The pain he had carried for so long was still there, heavier than ever. As Chima left the house and disappeared into the night, he realized that no amount of revenge could ever heal the wounds in his heart. His mother was gone, and now he was truly alone. After his mother's death, Chima's heart grew even darker. He continued to wander from village to village, carrying the bitterness and pain of his past wherever he went. The snake had become his weapon, and he used it to hurt others, believing it was his duty to teach people, especially women, a lesson. In Chima's mind, every woman was to blame for the suffering he had endured. His mother's abandonment had destroyed him, and now he vowed to make all women pay for the pain they caused. Chima was very handsome, and he knew it. His good looks and charm allowed him to lure women easily. They were drawn to him, unaware of the danger that lurked beneath his charming exterior. Once he gained their trust, he would use the snake to kill them, leaving no trace that connected him to their deaths. He didn't stay in any village for too long, moving on as soon as he completed his sinister mission. For a while, it seemed like Chima would get away with his vengeful spree. No one suspected the handsome stranger of being a killer, and there were never any clues left behind. The villagers would mourn their dead, unaware that the man who caused the tragedy had already moved on to his next target. But things changed when Chima arrived in the village of Ukoja. There he met Adana, a woman who had been following him for months. Adana's best friend had been one of Chima's victims, and she had vowed to take revenge. She had spent time tracking Chima from village to village, determined to stop him before he could claim any more lives. Before coming to Ukoja, Adana had visited a powerful healer who gave her a magical flute. The healer had explained that the flute had the power to control snakes, and it would be Adana's only weapon against Chima. With the flute in hand, and her heart full of determination, Adana was ready to face the man who had caused so much pain. When Adana first met Chima in Ukoja, she didn't reveal her true intentions. Like many others before her, she pretended to be charmed by him. She spent time with him, all while waiting for the right moment to strike. Chima, unaware of who she really was, believed she was just another victim, easily fooled by his charm. One evening, as Chima prepared to use the snake to kill Adana, she pulled out the magical flute. Before Chima could react, Adana began to play the flute, and the snake immediately responded to its sound. Chima's eyes widened in shock as he realized what was happening. The snake, which had always obeyed him, was now under Adana's control. "No! This can't be happening!" Chima shouted, trying to call the snake back, but it no longer listened to him. The snake turned toward Chima, its eyes gleaming with venomous intent. Adana, still playing the flute, directed the snake to attack its former master. The snake lunged at Chima, sinking its deadly fangs into his flesh. Chima fell to the ground, gasping in pain as the venom quickly spread through his body. His once powerful weapon had now become his undoing. He tried to fight back, but it was too late. The venom was strong and Chima's life began to fade away. As the venom coursed through his body, Chima looked up at the snake, and in that moment, something changed inside him. His mind flashed with memories of all the lives he had taken, all the women he had killed. He realized that his vengeful killings had not brought him the peace he sought. Instead, they had only made his heart darker and his life more empty. In his final moments, as he lay dying, Chima whispered to himself, "Perhaps I should have done things differently." But it was too late. The snake, now motionless, curled beside him. It had been a part of him for so long, and now it shared his fate. As Chima's life faded, the snake too died alongside him. Together they were both victims of the path they had chosen, driven by anger, consumed by vengeance, and destroyed by their own hatred. And with that, Chima's vengeful killing spree came to an end. The darkness he had carried within him for so long finally consumed him, leaving behind nothing but regret.